Hey everybody, Mark the Kardavox Academy here. I'm laughing because right when I started to try to record, the smoke detector started beeping at me, but I'm back. We're re-recording the intro. We're doing a late reaction of Lorna Shore, Oblivion. Now, if you are new to the channel, this reaction is going to be more of a vocal analysis. I myself am a metal vocalist of 16, 17-ish years. I don't remember when exactly I started, but it's been a long time. I'm also a full-time harsh metal vocal coach. I teach people how to make all sorts of sounds like and safely and efficiently so they don't hurt themselves and they can follow their metal vocal journey goals. Been doing it full-time for about 5 years. Love it. And I'm excited to talk about this song. Lorna Shore has been touring on Pain Remains for a long time. Time for a new single, boys. And here it is. So let's just go ahead and get into it. Lorna Shore, Oblivion. We got some swirly looking rocks. Here we go. Let's light some incense to set the mood. Okay, I'm going to pause it right there because we have a guitar change. It's usually a good place to pause. So, again, if you're new to the channel, I pause all the time to talk about vocal analysis. So, that's what it is. Won't change. So, let's go ahead and talk about a couple things. First and foremost, the main thing I'm noticing is Will's voice is mixed in what seems to me it's a little bit far back in the mix. It's not necessarily bad, but it's not what I expect in a lot of like deathcore mixes. Now, genres are evolving and changing over time, and no genre is a monolith. But I'm surprised that, especially with, you know, his star power, his voice is kind of pushed a little bit farther back than I think I would prefer. I do wish his voice was a little bit more forward because his screams sound sick as heck. Although I will say, on that same note, it is allowing me to really hear what the guitar and drums are doing, and I don't know much about guitar and drums, so I'm not going to like comment on it too much. But what I will say is that the drumming is nuts. I just love that speed, like that sort of blackened. I know that term gets thrown around a lot, but that sort of blackened feel with those techie deathcore riffs over top. I think that's really cool. But let's go ahead and talk about a couple of the main things that I want you to pay attention to while we listen to Will's voice. So, granted, his voice may have changed a little bit since some of the previous releases, but one thing that's really cool about Will's voice is the way that he works with the sound that he creates, right? When we're thinking about harsh vocalization, we have all sorts of different things we can talk about, right? Some vocals are really thick and chunky and girthy, you know, like this, like the old school. It's actually coming back, getting really popular again. That like really chunky false chord, which I'm a huge fan of, and I do a lot of, right? And then you have your more TV static screams, the stuff that's more hyper compressed, maybe not hyper compressed, but compressed, more pressurized, and that tends to have like that again, that TV static white noise sort of, and pretty much every scream of his that I can think of has TV staticky sound. You know, he did that study with the up at the University of Utah, the charismatic voice. I was in the second leg of that study in March, and I'm trying to remember, but I feel like every vocal we saw, there was a compression of supraglottal tissues, right? And that's what's going to give you that staticky noise. Now we're going to get more into that in a second, but that sound on its own, and hear what I say before you respond, can be pretty boring, right? For example, now Will and I do vocals entirely differently. No scream that I'm going to do today sounds like Will, because when I got scoped up at the University of Utah and I compared it to what I saw him doing, there was not a single thing that looked similar. Not a single thing, right? So don't expect any of my screams to sound like Will, but we can still utilize the sounds that I make to talk about concepts and to talk about filters and to talk about all these things. But if I do like a like, I think that sounds kind of cool, right? I use it in my own music in Kardashev. But if I take that stuff away, right? Hello, everybody. Like, that's not that great, right? And so a lot of these TV staticky screams really need us to create interesting mouth shapes to boost certain frequencies and make the voice sound thick. And he is really good at that. He uses a lot of diphthongs. We'll talk about those in a second. He uses a lot of bending. He uses a lot of very dynamic movement. So these are just things I want you to think about. I want you to think about, okay, the sound of the white noise of the scream and the way that it's shaped, because the way that it's shaped is really, in my opinion, where a lot of the magic happens. Let's go ahead and continue on. But at 8.5 minutes, right, I wanted to set the stage so you had something to think about as we go through. Here we go. Oh. Okay, that's another good spot to stop. I'm not even watching the video because I'm listening to what's going on. Yeah, so already we hear a lot of very interesting and very distinct shapes being put on top of this distortion, right? So one of the advantages of these really compressed tones is that you can create a lot of variation, a lot of different tones and colors with the same or slightly altered distortion, right? So you have Will, and he does a lot of movement of forward and closed and open and back, forward and closed and open and back. Now, this video, it's probably going to be kind of long because, like, again, the song is 8.5 minutes, but there's no way I'm going to encapsulate everything there's no way I can encapsulate anything that the entirety of what every vocalist does in a video. But I can point out some of the things that at least I, as both a vocalist and a vocal instructor, notice about Will. And one of them is this iconic forward and back, forward closed, open and back. And this is something he does a lot in his mids and lows, right? So when we're thinking about resonance, when we're thinking about the way that we shape sound, right, we can think of it in a couple different ways. The first, and this should all be in the context of where we feel vibration, right? So if I take, again, this sound, right, I can, if I do this, my vocal tract is very closed down. My French teacher in college used to call this un cul de poule. If you know what it means, you know what it means. But to help us, because the sound isn't common in English. En cul de poule, right? I still don't say it correctly. She'd, Réjean would whoosh. No, she wouldn't hit me. She'd just be like, hey. She was always trolling me. But anyway, so there's this close down, and if you want to try to make this sound, this vowel for your lows, the easiest way I have found is to say E, nice and vibrating up in the front, E, and then make your tongue stays the same, but your lips say oo. E, and that creates this really cool sound. And what he is incredibly good at, I think this is one of the things that when I think about a lot of other vocalists, Will is like exceptionally good at, is shifting resonance without any wavering in the tone. This is crazy, right? It's something that, like, you kind of have to do if you're going to be in a lot of this, like, highly vocally technical deathcore. But it's kind of crazy because as we shift our vowels, right, we do have the tendency for the top of our throat and these tissues that we're moving together to create the distortion and hold back the airflow. They want to move too. So it's an extremely precise, extremely surgical movement that needs to be done, right? And he will open from like an he's got a lot of that movement. Again, the chunk of my scream doesn't sound the same, but the movement and the filter is very similar, right? Right? And he's really good at it. The fact that he does that so smoothly and live, I saw them live. I've only ever seen Lorna Shore live one time, but it was like, it looked too easy. It was crazy. I want to talk about his highs in a second. I'm going to wait to see if some are coming through, but I want to toss you a little exercise. It's actually really easy. If you're having trouble holding on to any sort of, this works better with like compressed tones. You can use it with something more loose too, like a, if you wanted to, you can. But essentially what you want to do is you want to start with your clean voice and you want to find the two vowels that you want to hold on to, right? So let's say I'm going for that narrow tone and then for that bigger tone. What you're going to do with your clean voice is just move between the two. And what you want to do is you want to take two fingers and you just want to gently put them on the bottom of your tongue. And what you're doing here is you're paying attention to the sensation of that movement, right? And you're making it as smooth as possible. So if you notice your larynx bobbing up and down a lot, if you notice your tongue's going to feel like it's moving and shifting, but if you feel it clenching, or like really turning into like as hard as a rock, again with your clean tone, then you can slow it down. So much of being good at deathcore vocals is practicing repetitive, coordinated movements, right? And then from there, you can throw your distortion on it. Anyways, something for you to play around with. Let's keep going. I'm going to pause it right there just because I can hear the breakdown coming, and I know people are going to get irritated, and it makes me giggle a little bit. So a couple really cool things here that he's doing, and this is, so often when we're talking about harsh vocalization, everybody wants to talk about the way that the distortion is created, and that makes a lot of sense because that's where we get the sound from, right? And we will. And we're going to. But what I want to talk about is this really cool choice he made. With the delivery, the composition of his vocals. So everything right now has been very legato, right? Long drawn sentences, blah, 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 right? But now we get some very punctuated, some very staccato, right? And it sounds very, Travis Ryan. Cattle Decapitation. Anybody who's watched this channel for like 3 videos knows that Travis Ryan is like probably the top spot rotates, but he is most consistently like my favorite like extreme metal vocalist of all time ever. I Alex Tan and Johnny Davey, and recently Cheney Crab especially. The four of them kind of swirl around in my top vocalists. But yeah, he does this really cool, like, I don't know how to describe it. It gets like more staccato as it goes. I don't know what I'm saying. Let's keep going. Yo, so that was not what I was expecting. We were able to hear that breakdown coming, right? And that's something that it's usually fairly telegraphed in deathcore. And it makes sense. It's a smart move, actually, because it gets everybody excited, right? And I was expecting, you know, for the past 3-4 years, the breakdown that has been very popular in deathcore is the very slow, like, you know, reverse snare. And then, you know, some sort of like just kind of really open, a lot of open space, a lot of slow sounds. In what I heard was this breakdown kind of made me feel like it was 2010 again. The like that was like I felt like I was in my early 20s, like throwing fists at. I was never a mosher, but that was like that had some old school vibes. You know, the gray in my beard started getting its color back. You know, that was really interesting. I've not heard a breakdown like that in a song like this in a long time. Even like the second half of the breakdown when it opens up a little bit, like, man, that's a really old school method of I don't know about old school, but it's a method that was very popular in like the 2010s ish, into the 2010s. Cool to hear it coming back. I got distracted, honestly. But you know, one thing that I want to talk about is highs now, right? Now, one thing that, again, I think is really smart about the way that Will does his vocals, at least the way that I'm perceiving it, right? I've never actually talked to the guy. Maybe like an Instagram message or two, but never had him on the channel or anything. But is the use of hypo versus hypo really and hypernasality, right? Because sometimes his vocals, now again, I'm going to do a high that's, a lot of people call this a false chord high. It doesn't, and that's what I will often call it because that's the more common thing. It's not what it feels like at all. Certainly not a fry. But when we have multiple things we can do with our nasality, right? One of them is hyponasality. And with hyponasality, it kind of sounds like I have a cold. If I plug my nose, hey everybody, my name is Mark. You notice that there's no difference in sound. Hypernasality, hey everybody, hi. It's actually resonating in my nasal cavity. And this can have a really huge impact on our high vocals. And essentially what we're doing here is we have a structure in the very back of our mouth called the soft palate, or the velum, if you want to sound really fancy. And that can open and close, right? We open and close it quite frequently when we say words that end in an NG. Sung, he sung a song. He hung a picture on the wall, right? Hung. We can open and close that. We could do it in different ways. And we could totally block off, right? Hello. And so if I do a high that's hypo nasal and a high that's hyper nasal, we get very different sounds, right? So I'm going to say, what would be a good vowel for this? Probably wah, maybe more of a wah, right? So hypo nasal, wow, 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 right there, wow. Now I'm going to go hyper nasal, wow, 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 wow. You get very different tones and colors. And with his more super compressed, like we'll just call it a fry tone, right? I know when they did the scope, he was calling certain things false chord and certain things other thing, and it didn't look like any false chord I'd ever seen. But also, I'm not the more videos of me that you watch, you'll find that I'm not like married to terminology very much. I think it's important, but I'm not like, well, technically it's a super sow cow backflip whistle fry tone Mach 5. It doesn't really, I don't think that's that interesting, right? But what is interesting is the way that the sound works. You can call it whatever you want, but the way that the sound works and the way that the airflow changes things, that's fascinating, right? And so with his really compressed, again, we'll say fry tone, it sounds, adding in that nasality, it's dirty. It is very dirty, but it's so surgical as well. And that's one thing that I think, I like to think of Will's voice as being like crispy, like McDonald's Sprite, it's very like Alka-Seltzery, right? Versus some metal vocalists, like it's like Kevin Malone dropping chili on the ground, just messy. And I love it. And that's actually more of what I listen to personally. But this stuff is still very impressive. Let's keep going. Let's see if I can not get distracted by a breakdown and pull some technique out here. Here we go. This is the Here's probably where the super slow breakdown happens. So one thing I want to mention to you as well is he is incredibly good at sliding through different techniques. And I want to talk about how we can do that as well, right? So, obviously when you're listening to a fully produced song, there's very likely a lot of multi-track recording going on, right? And what is a very common practice, not always, but what is a very common practice is you put your lows on 1 or 2 tracks, your highs on 1 or 2 tracks. So maybe not every single technique, but many different vocal techniques and styles you put on their own track. Not always, right? But I'm sure that there's some of that going on here. One thing, what's going on with my sleeve? One thing, though, is when I saw them live, he was sliding through things very, very, very easily. So, this is something he does, and he does very well. And it can be very difficult for a lot of vocalists, even more advanced vocalists. There are times when I get vocalists who have been, touring or doing session work for years. And this is one of the things they need help with. I won't say every time, but much of the time it comes down to over projecting or simply just using too much pressure. This can be tricky, right? These super compressed vocals have a lot of advantages, right? A lot of advantages. You can hold your screams for a lot longer than you can with a traditional false chord. For a lot of people, even myself included, it's a little bit easier to shape the color and tone. Well, maybe not easier, but it's a little bit more, let's say, user-friendly the mouth shape changes you make you get more for your bang for your buck, essentially. Whereas with bigger, chunkier tones, sometimes you have to really exaggerate to get much of a contrast of sound, right? One of the disadvantages, or things you just have to think about, is with these compressed tones, it can be so easy to create a sound that's amazing, but utilizes way too much pressure, right? So let's talk about pressure. Let's talk about how much do we need? Well, this is a tricky thing because different screams need different pressure, right? When I do something like that, what I am doing is, taking the tissues at the top of above my vocal cords, right? Our retinoids, our aryepiglottic folds, and just smushing them together. Now, for me personally, and other vocalists, my epiglottis is also tilting back. And from what I remember, what I saw, my retinoids are sort of touching the base of my epiglottis, and there's like some of this going on, right? This creates tiny little openings for air. So how do I say, well, how much pressure do I need? And what happens if I move to a false chord mid, right? Hey, boyso, hey. The activation of that is entirely different. So how do I, smoothly go, yo, mate? It can be very tricky, right? There are a couple things we can do. First and foremost, learn how much pressure each scream takes. How do we do this? Well, one of the best ways to do it is to breathe into the scream that you're doing slowly. Okay? And you want to think of this scream not as a scream, but as a funny voice. One of the best things that you can do as a harsh metal vocalist is get out of your head about the fact that these screams have to be loud. Whenever that discussion comes up on the internet, somebody who's wearing the same Oakleys from 1992 or whatever is like, nah, screams are loud. Back in my day, we went to Slayer shows and now we all have vocal nodules and we're cool, right? Nothing against Slayer. I'm just saying there's a certain type that always jumps into that conversation, right? Mute them. You don't need that bad advice. What we do want to think about is that these vocalizations are a lot closer to voice acting. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this. For this to work, you have to kind of already be able to do the sound, right? So this might be more of an intermediate thing. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to breathe into that sound. So my vocal posture is going to get ready for it. You can't see it, but I'm ready. And I'm going to slowly breathe in. And I'm going to stop when it sounds right. So what I'm doing is I'm teaching my body to recognize the sensation of the minimum pressure needed to get the sound that I want. Because in actuality, if I tell you, sometimes people will be like, well, how much pressure does this need? And I'll be like, I don't know, 6. 6 what? What's the unit, right? We have tools that we could measure this, but not all of, we're not going to be practicing in vocal labs where we can measure air pressure, where we can measure that, right? So we have to learn how to feel it. This is a very sensation-based art form, okay? Then you get comfortable with your other vocal styles, right? Say a mid. I got a burp. Say a mid. False chord mid. Really open. Not quite there yet. Hey, there it is. Right there. Now, the interesting thing about this is that it doesn't feel like much more than talking like this. Hey guys, what's going on? Yeah, good to see you. So I'm learning these things, right? What about a high? Oh, interesting, right? Now I can practice those two or those three next to each other. Right? It takes a long time, but you'll be able to do it. And I think when it comes to like transitions of deathcore vocalists, Will is one of the he's smoother than me. That's for sure. One of the smoothest that I can think of. And if you haven't seen Lorna Shore live, you absolutely should, because even if you're a vocalist out there and you don't like this kind of music, first of all, I'm surprised you're watching the video, but second of all, you should go anyway. If you're like, I don't like Lorna Shore and I don't like deathcore, you should still go see them live, because I feel like you can learn a lot about harsh vocal technique. Watching Will do his thing. Left to Suffer as well. Taylor Barber, another great vocalist to watch live. Great vocalist to watch live. Anyway, here we go. So, as this is an educational reaction video, some of you were probably watching my reaction to that breakdown. And I want to explain to you that my face does not represent what I thought of it, okay? So, here's what I mean. That was extremely good. And we're going to talk about a lot of the things in that. We're not going to listen to it again. And I want to explain why. I talked about this in my To the Hellfire reaction way back in the day. I have an extremely visceral reaction to mucus. It just is what it is. A lot of people love metal vocals where you can hear the mucus. That makes me have to vomit. It's not a judgment of the vocalist. It's not a judgment of the thing. It's like when you go to the doctor and they hit you on the knee with the little hammer and your leg kicks. You didn't choose for your leg to kick. It just happens, right? And those weren't even some of his most mucusy screams, but there were some mucusy screams, and I have to fight it back. I have to fight it down. So it's nothing against Will. It's nothing against the song. I mean, I hesitate to say it sounds amazing because it makes me want to throw up. But again, it's just a reaction, right? So please nobody get upset with the fact that I looked like I didn't like it. There was so much to talk about. I thought it was great. I thought it was awesome. It's just really this sound of like legitimately, like if my wife or a friend has a cough and you can hear mucus rattling around it, I have to like internally be like, you can imagine how great it is having a 2.5-year-old such as I do. And it's just nothing but, yeah, it's brutal. But anyway, so I'm still feeling a little bit. Anyway, so here's the thing, okay? This breakdown is such a good example of what I'm talking about when it comes to pressure and when it comes to understanding pressure across screams and techniques and stringing things together, right? You simply cannot get to this level unless you have a very good understanding of what these screams feel like in your body, right? Now, I talked about that a lot already. I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about high vocals, and I want to talk about how we can get tones to sound bigger and thicker, right? So let's talk about high tones first. One thing that's really important to understand about a lot of high screams, I'm not speaking about all high screams, I'm speaking about a lot of high screams, is that if they're difficult for you, a large part of this can be that it feels as though, and in many ways it is as though, we are moving across registers, right? So when you think about registers, you probably think of chest voice, head voice, mix, whistle, and those are good terms to think about. Normally, and this is kind of why it's a little bit of a messy, it doesn't one-for-one translate. Normally when we're talking about registers, we're talking a lot about vocal cord connection. Well, for many screams, not all, but for many, our vocal cords are not adducting and vibrating against each other in the same way that they would when you sing. So what does vocal register have to do it? Well, oftentimes to reach, especially depending on the style of clean singing you're doing, to reach these different places, we have to move other parts of our vocal tract, right? For a lot of contemporary and a lot of pop singers that are out there, Verona would have something to say on this, I'm sure. Hitting the note requires specific movements in the back of the mouth and opening or twangifying of the upper part of the vocal tract. So with this, we hear in Will a lot of, now again, I'm not going to make this scream because that's just not how I do it, right? But if we were to take his scream and switch it with a clean voice, I suspect if I ever do get him on the channel, which is unlikely, but it'd be sick if it happened. If I ever do get him on the channel, right, I'll probably ask him to do this. He doesn't have to, but if we take his scream, I imagine we'd get a clean voice, kind of like, right? And that sounds silly, but when we change it with distortion, right? And clearly, to do that high scream, I have to be in a very laryngally raised, pharyngally closed space. I can't do that with my larynx super neutral. It's just not, it can't be done, right? And so his ability to move his vocal tract into that shape so quickly and precisely and carry out these almost like sharp ice pick textures is really impressive. And someday I'm going to pick his brain about it. It's going to happen. I don't know how, but it will. Right? Now, with this being said, another thing about Will's voice, and I mentioned this at the beginning, and one thing I'm really glad that they did, I know I kind of like poked a little bit of fun at it. It was friendly, but it is certainly a marker of the genre, right? The like, right? Like those types of breakdowns. And this wasn't so far down that road. But one thing, as much as I tease them, I actually really enjoy them because they are beautiful for vocal analysis, right? So one thing I mentioned, and we can really hear is that the source, right? The way that the tissues are coming together creates a very thin white noise sound, right? So if I have like a, let's see what I can use. Maybe something like, there we go. That's not something that's going to blow anyone's mind, right? It might make them go, oh, that's weird. Right there like this. But what do we do to make that sound thick? Especially because when we're thinking about, now I usually leave this up to whoever's producing Kardashev's music, but still, you got to kind of think about how your voice is going to sit within the instrumentation with the way that your band likes to write, right? So what can we do to shape and mold that sound? Well, let's say I want to take that thin sound. I want to keep those sparkly, crackly sounds. But what I don't want to do is, but what I do want to do is I want to add a lot of girth to it. Well, this approach, having done this for a while, I've found that some people do this differently. So this is perhaps more of a Mark approach than other people would do, but it works, right? Is I'm going to hold everything here steady. I'm not going to change much in here. In fact, I'm intentionally going to try to change it here as little as possible. But what I am going to do is I'm going to take my mouth and I'm going to do whatever the heck I have to do to make those sound waves. I'm going to pretend like I want those sound waves bouncing around in my mouth for longer. Okay. So what are some ways I can do that? Well, one way is curling the tongue up. This is super common. We all know about it, right? So I like to visualize the sound waves literally bouncing off my tongue and then back and forth, back and forth. They're going to come out of my mouth eventually, but they got to bounce around a little bit, right? What's another thing I can do? Well, I can pucker my lips and push my jaw forward. I don't like to push my jaw too much forward because it can get a little sore, but just a little nudge. Never have been a problem for me before. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to think about like that, creating a yawning sensation. In the back of my mouth. So, right? And you can hear how big and boomy that is. What if I start with my distortion and I try to throw some of that stuff on there? May not translate perfectly, but one of the great things about harsh metal vocals is if it sounds cool and if it's not hurting you, you're doing it right. That's really it. Those are the only two rules you really need to think about. Is it functional and does it sound cool? Heck yeah. Right? So I had this, what sound was I doing? It was something like that. Let's curl the tongue back. Sounds interesting, right? Doesn't sound like what he was doing, but the concept is the same. Do it with a low. Tongue curls back. And you get really cool tones that way. Now, sorry, I was nerding out and I got a little off track, but this is just something to think about, right? When you are listening to Will Ramos and you're thinking, I want to sound like that. Sometimes don't think about the grit. Think about the shape of the mouth, right? This is a very Will Ramos thing to do. It's not necessarily uncommon in the genre, but he does it really well. Let's keep going. The blue of that guy's eye against the red of his face was a beautiful shot. That was a beautiful shot, which, by the way, I was so focused on vocal analysis, I really didn't pay much attention to the video, but what I did see was beautiful and very well filmed and edited and directed. So, sorry. Yeah, you know, I hate to say it, but I this is just a personal opinion. I wish his voice was a little bit more forward in the chorus. I do. When it into oblivion, like the vowel forms, the formants, the way he's articulating and saying or screaming the lyrics is really cool. And I kind of wish it was like I kind of get it. It sounds like he's like screaming in like a canyon and it's this distant voice on the wind. And that's really cool. I love that. And if anybody listens to the music that we create in Kardashev, you're going to call me out because our most recent album we released, the vocals were a lot more forward, but we have a history of the vocals being very reverby and far back. So I'm kind of being a hypocrite right now. I totally get it. But yeah, his vocals were really cool in the chorus. And I just wish they were a little bit more forward because I wanted to chew on them a little bit. You know what I mean? I wanted to chew on them a little bit. we're at almost an hour, and I have a lesson in 9 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut it off there. There's a whole lot else I could say, but they are things that I've already mentioned in previous. I've got, I think, 3 other Lorna Shore reactions on the channel, vocal analysis is on the channel. So yeah, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. Pretty cool song. 8.5 minutes is definitely a chunky time. Personally, I don't mind because I love most of the songs that I love are like 6 to 10 minutes. In fact, when I see a song and it's like 12 minutes, I'm like, ooh, you're speaking my language. I think they probably could have gotten away with a little bit shorter of a runtime. But again, I love long songs, so it was absolutely no problem for me. Yeah, great track. I love the riffs. I think I was also especially impressed with the drumming. I can't really comment on it because, again, I'm not a drummer. I don't know the terminology. But I absolutely loved how fast, how blistering it was. I love a good blast beat. I love what to me sounded like somewhat subtle black metal influence opening up. It's good stuff. Be interesting to hear how much the rest of the album is like this. So with that being said, if you're interested in learning about harsh vocalization, head to KardavoxAcademy.com. You can check it out there. Many thanks. Much love. I'm out.